Hello and welcome to CryptoVision, your guide to the world of cryptocurrencies. Today, we are going to explore the fascinating world of Bitcoin, the first and most popular cryptocurrency in existence. Bitcoin has been around for over a decade, but it still remains a mystery to many people. In this video, we are going to dive into what Bitcoin is, let's understand how Bitcoin works. Bitcoin transactions are carried out between Bitcoin wallets, which have a digital signature for security purposes. Each transaction in the network is public, meaning that every participant can not only view data about its sender and recipient in the public chain of blocks, but also trace all the transaction history that preceded it, up to the initial point of the first cryptocurrency coin emergence. Some prefer to simply hold on to Bitcoins, hoping for their value to increase in the future, but the whole point of cryptocurrencies is to use them, i.e. spend them. So how are transactions made when you spend your Bitcoins? Let's delve into the details. Firstly, there are no actual Bitcoins as such. It's an interesting fact, but it's true. There are no Bitcoins even stored on a hard drive. We say that someone has Bitcoins, but if you look at a specific Bitcoin address, there will be no digital coins stored there in the way that dollars, pounds, or rubles are stored in bank accounts. You cannot point to a physical object or even an electronic file and say this is a Bitcoin. Instead, there are only records of transactions between different addresses, with balances that go up and down. Every transaction that has ever taken place is stored in a huge ledger called the blockchain. For example, if you want to know the balance on a particular Bitcoin address, looking at the address itself will show you nothing. You have to calculate the balance by looking at all the transactions that relate to that address, which are stored in the blockchain. A transaction in the context of Bitcoin is essentially an action where someone sends some amount of Bitcoin from one address to another. Let's say Mary wants to send some Bitcoins to John. This action would be recorded as a transaction, which would contain three types of data. Input: the record of where the Bitcoins Mary is sending to John came from. Let's say Mary received them from her friend, Olivia. Amount: the amount of Bitcoins that Mary is sending to John. Output: the Bitcoin address of John where Mary is sending the Bitcoins to. How does Bitcoin transfer work? To send Bitcoins to someone, you need two things, a Bitcoin address and a private key. It is not advisable to draw analogies between a Bitcoin address and a bank account, they have little in common. In particular, opening a Bitcoin address does not require filling out a pile of papers or providing any identifying documents. In fact, they are created randomly and represent a random sequence of letters and numbers. The private key is also a sequence of letters and numbers, but unlike your Bitcoin address, it is kept secret. Your Bitcoin address can be thought of as a transparent deposit box. Anyone can look inside it and see what's inside, but only someone with the private key can open and take the contents. Returning to Mary and John. When Mary wants to send John a few digital coins, she uses her private key to sign a request for the transfer, which includes, as mentioned earlier, three types of data: the Bitcoin address from which the coins were received by Mary, the amount, and the recipient's address. She then sends this request from her Bitcoin wallet to the Bitcoin network. There, miners find and then confirm the new transaction in the network by adding it to the block of transactions, which ultimately leads to an increase in John's Bitcoin address balance. Sometimes transaction confirmation can take a long time. Why? The answer is simple. Transactions are confirmed by miners who are busy mining new coins. Sometimes you have to wait until they finish mining. The algorithm built into Bitcoin provides that each block takes about 10 minutes to mine. However, if you pay through processing companies such as BitPay, Coinbase or similar, you don't have to wait for anything. They have a built-in mechanism for instant transaction confirmation after the Bitcoin transfer. What if the sum at the input and output of a transaction is different? As a reminder, Bitcoins exist only as records of transactions that have occurred between addresses. In the end, in the big ledger, blockchain, there can be multiple different transactions associated with each specific address. Let's consider this situation. We have Mary, who, as we wrote above, sent Bitcoins to John. Now imagine that it's Mary's birthday, and her friends decided to send her digital coins as a gift. So, Sveta sent 2 Bitcoins, Daniel sent 3, and Yulia sent 1, each from their own Bitcoin address and, of course, at different times of the day. So now Mary's Bitcoin address balance has increased by 6 Bitcoins, but this does not mean that the transactions from her friends were combined into one. They will still be associated with Mary's address as separate transactions, each from a different address. Now, if Mary wants to send John a couple of Bitcoins again, say, 4, then her wallet will try to use transaction records with different sums that add up to the required amount of Bitcoins that she is sending to John. That is, according to our example with Mary's birthday, John can have transactions from Daniel, 3 bitcoins, and Yulia, 1 bitcoin, tied to him. However, there is a chance that Mary may want to send John an amount of bitcoins that cannot be obtained from the sum of other transactions. In our example, such a scenario is possible if Mary decides to forward 1.5 bitcoins to her friend. Her Bitcoin address does not have transactions exactly for this amount, and none of the existing ones will provide this amount when added together. Mary cannot break the transaction into smaller amounts, transactions can only be used as a whole. The Bitcoin algorithm will work as follows: John will receive a transaction from Mary for a larger sum, for example, the one that Sveta sent to Mary on her birthday, 2 bitcoins. Half a bitcoin will be returned to Mary as change. In particular, the input data for the transaction from Mary to John will be data on the transaction from Sveta to Mary, and John's Bitcoin address will be the output data. By sending the transaction for processing, Mary's wallet will create a new Bitcoin address belonging to Mary, which in turn will create its own transaction for 0.5 bitcoins only from John to Mary. As a result, it will turn out that the transaction for 2 bitcoins from Sveta to Mary will go to John, and the transaction for 0.5 bitcoins from John to Mary, which means that Mary sent 1.5 bitcoins to John. Do you need to pay a commission for transactions? Sometimes, but not always. The commission is calculated taking into account various factors. Some wallets allow you to manually set the size of the reward. Any part of the transaction that is not taken by the recipient, or that is returned as change, is considered a reward. It goes to the miner who was lucky enough to solve the transaction block as an additional reward. Currently, most miners process transactions without rewards. However, given that the reward for the next block is decreasing, this situation is unlikely to remain unchanged. Previously, one of the confusing facts about transaction fees was that their calculation was complex and convoluted. It was the result of several protocol updates and evolved accordingly. Core software updates that manage Bitcoin transactions will change the way fees are processed towards automatically selecting the minimum reward size. Can I get a check or document confirming a Bitcoin transfer? Bitcoin doesn't actually involve checks or receipts. Although upcoming updates will change the way payments work, making them more thoughtful and user-friendly. Processing companies like BitPay also offer additional features that are not typically provided in standard Bitcoin transactions, such as statements and order confirmation pages. What if I want to send a fraction of a Bitcoin? You can definitely do that. Bitcoins are divisible units, down to 100 millionth. Thank you for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to our channel for more content like this. Also, let us know in the comments what topics you would like us to cover in future videos. Your feedback is greatly appreciated. Until next time, take care and keep learning.